5 minutes or
Yeah, you have a few minutes.
Excellent. Well, yeah.
What are the physics and biomechanics of not getting hurt while doing that?
Actually, really interesting. Because yes, that's an excellent point. Why doesn't your hand break when all the rest of it is? And there are two good reasons for that. And thank you so much. This was a note I meant to actually include on this. First, your hand, I mean, at a certain level, your hand will deform when you are striking things. It may not be obvious, but even if I'm holding my hand and making it very, very rigid, it will, if you look at it on like a high-speed camera, the structure of the hand will actually flex to absorb some of the force that's involved. If I'm striking like this, this bone here, this particular metacarpal, is pretty thin and pretty fragile, but it's protected by a couple of different muscles that lay over it that tighten up. And then also as it comes down, and when I'm striking, some of the force is being deflected back down into the tendons here in my wrist. So the relatively flexible structure of the hand and some other parts of your body actually helps to do some of that. It's also true that the materials, like bone, harder than wood, bone, harder than cement. Yes, you can break someone's bones by hitting them with cement, but actually, in terms of as a structural material, if you think about like what a tube of bone stretched across something will hold together much better than a tube of cinder block material or comparable would be. So it's much sturdier that way. So basically, your hand is stronger and it can withstand much more sort of force that way. And to a certain level, it does hurt, as the trick thing goes there. The trick is not binding. Yeah.
Yeah. When you have two blocks of wood together, is it harder because the stresses are dispersed sort of over a round area as opposed to if you've got them separated by the separators, you've got sort of a point stress or a line stress?
I haven't actually ever seen a really detailed analysis of everything that's going on when it's the straight stacking, because everybody sort of always seem to do it with the spacers. But the thing is, with the spacers, in effect, it's a series of breaks. You're breaking one board and then everything's hitting the next one. With them stacked up like that, and this may be wrong in an oversimplification, but it means you have to transfer that energy all the way down through to the bottom and start breaking. You have to create the rupture from the bottom up of that. So that takes more energy. Yeah.
So I've heard people talk about stacking boards for other things and breaking not the top board but something within it.
Yeah.
Is that possible, and how does that work?
I wondered whether somebody would ask about that. I have always heard of that. I have never seen it demonstrated, and I outside of things like movies and television. So I'm in no position to say it definitely can happen. I don't know why or how that would be possible. There may be ways of being able to actually do it. If somebody's doing it, there is a trick, a technique that's involved.
That is with spacers?
Sorry?
With spacers?
Typically that's without spacers. Right. Typically that's with, it's like with the solid, it would be like if I stacked up 5 of those together, and I would say I will break the one on the bottom, or I will break the third one down. And there are people who say they can do this sort of thing. I don't know. I've never seen it done in real life.
Would it make sense at some level that you can create a shock wave with the peak of the wave at a certain
Maybe. I wouldn't know exactly what would be involved in trying to do something like that. But
what do you use for separators, and how much space do you need?
The separators can be really simple. I've seen people doing things as simple as like pencils or other pieces of wood, or little just,
Like
wood towels.
But say 20% of the thickness of the board?
You want it to be less space than the thickness of the actual board.
Right,
so generally you want not too much space. I would say probably a good rule of thumb is something that's kind of like roughly a pencil width, or maybe a little bit thicker than that is usually good enough for that. I've never broken with spacers, so I don't know. But I yeah.
So how do you feel when you're in karate class and the teacher tells you to get in touch with your chi and...
This is the lucky thing with this is that and I don't know how much this reflects what is done in terms of a lot of actual modern martial arts instruction. I've been studying martial arts for 17 years at this point, and honestly, the references to chi or ki or whatever in Japanese maybe you know, a handful of times over that whole time. Fundamentally, we don't do that. Most people sort of grasp at that as kind of a metaphor for, like, you know, summing up your energy and your concentration and just, you know, just drive right through that, and they may sort of resort in that hand-waving way of, like, you know, hold together your chi and do this. But nobody studying with takes that seriously. So that's what helps me.
Where did it originate from, crediting this energy to this particular sport, as opposed to any number of other sports back to Roman or Greek days?
Oh, I don't, you know, I think that it probably, I don't know a real answer on that, but I suspect that it's just, you know, to the extent that a lot of these are talking about Asian fighting arts, that it's part of what was sort of the morass of the whole idea of Asian concepts of medicine and physiology, and, you know, people didn't, it just all came out of that. Why were you strong? Well, it was because you had something that was coming in out of the air and it was going into your muscles, and it all just applied to that. I don't know of like a discrete, yes?
Well, could it also have been that in many cultures, I mean, we could take any example of any culture and say that those people that were in charge or had greater control or power were the most knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So that those people that had an idea of what physics was, they didn't have the same terminology that we do, but they knew that if you punch someone in the chest, just like you know I forgot what they were called, but the ball swings and you have 6 in the middle and one on the other. So basic transfer of energy. That if you punch someone in the chest, you can work in the artery.
I mean,
that would be an advantage of ancient culture.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, with all of these things, you know, there are always, you know, one of the reasons why there's a lot of secrecy associated with the teaching of a lot of these arts was precisely because they had techniques that they didn't want everybody to know about. So it was a way of managing to contain some of that sort of thing. Even if they didn't know the underlying physics, there was a sense that if you do things just right, you can do something. I just want to get that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm way off on this, but are these the similar, are these like the same principles that led to the collapse of the Twin Towers, basically?
Certain, I would, I mean, I'm, you know, going, I'm speaking out of school on that because I don't know for certain, but fundamentally I think a lot of the basic issue of things pancaking down, yes, some of that goes. It's definitely an issue if you're talking about like big stacks of ice, of why it is that you can see some. I mean, I've seen people stand up and they lay like, you know, 3, 4 or more giant slabs of ice, and they, you know, which would have spacers. And when they're breaking that, it's because they are breaking the top one and propelling those pieces down hard enough to shatter everything down. So that last one at the bottom breaks because it's got all the other pieces of ice dropping on top of it.
It actually was in the report. That actually was the reason they fell that way.
Yeah.
Martial arts has contributed, for better or worse, to many other sports, such as tennis, the grunt. Now, I imagine the grunt, if it helps at all, is to just help with focus. You know, what do you think of the...
Actually, it's funny because there was a very recent study, a lot of you may have heard about this, it actually just came out about the role of the grunt in tennis. Traditionally, yes, but just by sort of that exhalation is good just as a way of like putting all of your power into it. But somebody recently did a study that seemed to indicate that tennis players who were audible that way, it just apparently distracts the opponent very, very slightly.
I found it so annoying that I would grunt all the time when my opponent is.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, traditionally martial arts, it scares the other person. Anyway, thank you.